Okay.
Let me just, when this goes normal.
Good evening, councillors and members of the public. And before we commence the meeting, draw your attention to the fire regulations on the screen behind me. 3 exits in the event of fire alarm going, 1, 2 and 3. And we assemble across the road under the canopy outside Waitrose. Can I ask you all, please, make sure your mobile phones are switched off or to silent, and just ask the members of the public to remember that this is a meeting held in public. It's not a public meeting. Therefore, I ask you to respect those around you in the public gallery and the committee and refrain from booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. Let's move on to the main items of business. Item number 1, to confirm the minutes meeting held on the 11th of July, for which I signed them as a true record. Thank you very much. Item 2, apologies for absence. Emma?
We have apologies from Councillors Simon Inchbold, Libby Piper and Christian Hester is going to be slightly late.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 3, declarations of interest.
Prior to the meeting, we've had a declaration of non-pecuniary interest from councillors Mrs King and Knowles on the Scotland's Close Hazelmere application, B1, because they're acquainted with the neighbour. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Emma, questions from the public? Have we had any?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Question from members?
None received.
Thank you very much. Item 6, relevant government updates to government guidance or legislation since the last meeting. And I ask Beth Hallen-Smith to answer this one.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will be aware of the recently published new MPPF, and I just wanted to assure you that all of the reports before you this evening have been updated to include these changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And my error, I forgot to introduce the officers, particularly for the webcast, but in front of me on my right is Louise Yandel, who's the Senior Planning Officer and for Southern and Western area. Next to her is Flo Taylor, Senior Planning Officer, who will be reporting on the first item. Beth Hallen-Smith on the far right there, who is now the Development Control Manager, and all the very best in that position. And Lewis Jones, you all know, our legal member. So moving on then. Performance against government targets. Louise Yandel to report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As you can see from page 5 of your agenda reports, that the department are performing excellently in terms of speed, being well above the government targets of 60% for majors and 70% for non-majors. In terms of quality, again, the department are performing excellently in terms of non-majors, and in terms of majors, the figure is below the 10% target and has been coming down since the recent adoption of the local plan in February. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Louise. Item 8, should there be any site inspections, they'll be held on the 25th of September at a time to be agreed, but normally that's 10 o'clock. Moving on to applications for consideration tonight. A1 is WA 2017-1520, Hatherley Tower Road, Hindhead, GU 266 SP. And it's on pages 7 to 32. It's the proposal for the erection of 5 dwellings together with alterations to the existing access following demolition of the existing dwelling as amended and amplified by plans and information received on various dates between November last year and the 11th of June this year. And to introduce Flo Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. Members may recall that this application was brought before committee on the 22nd of November last year, where the members resolved to defer the application in order to seek to overcome the recommended refusal reason in respect of failure to demonstrate that the proposal would not result in harm to protected species. The site is located to the north-east of Tower Road in Hindhead and comprises a two-storey detached dwelling, Hatherley, and a detached garage set towards the centre of the site, which is a large plot. There's more mature vegetation to all bar the northeastern boundaries and a group tree preservation order covering the trees along the southwestern boundary but within the site. The aerial view shows the spread of surrounding residential development and the size of the plot in comparison to the surroundings. You can also see the trees around the site. Looking at the site photos, these images show the existing dwelling and northwest, northeast and southeastern boundaries of the site. These images show the southwestern boundary comprising the group tree preservation order trees, both from Tower Road on the left-hand side and inside the site on the right-hand side. Looking at the proposed site layout, the proposal would comprise the demolition of the existing dwelling and garage and the erection of five-bedroom, 2.5-storey dwellings with accommodation within the roof space of two different layout types, A and B, set either side of a spine access road. The layout has had minor adjustments since the application was previously considered by committee. The proposal would utilise existing access from Tower Road, which would be modified to have a slightly increased width and improved visibility displays. The engineering to create the revised access would include the carrying out of building and engineering operations within and contrary to the industry standards recommended root protection area for mature trees, subject to a TPO, that is likely to threaten the health and stability of the trees, which would be detrimental to the visual amenity and character of the area in the future. Additionally, whilst permission was previously granted under WA 2011-1926 for 4 dwellings on the site, back in here, as you can see on this slide, the A grade tree 23 larch, which is this one here, wasn't included for removal as part of that application. And within this application, you can see where the tree is within the road, and that would be removed. It's an A-grade tree which would have, and its loss would have an unacceptable impact on the visual amenity of the street scene. Additionally, whilst there was a poor relationship of gardens, amenity space and TPO trees in the previously approved scheme, the relationship between plots 1 and 3 and the TPO trees resulting from the current proposal, as you can see here, would be worse and place pressures from modern living on the entire TPO belt from these units, which would effectively include TPO trees in their garden areas. This would be likely to result in pressure to lop or fell the trees in the future. The current scheme is considered to be more harmful in respect of harm to TPO trees than the previously approved scheme because of the different engineering requirements from the revised internal driveway and the revised relationship of proposed habitable accommodation and diminished amenity space of the plots on the western side of the site. Officers consider that there would be sufficient separation distance from existing neighbouring dwellings to prevent harm to neighbouring amenity. However, the front-to-front window separation distances within the site would fall below the standards within the Council's Residential Extensions SPD and result in a poor standard of accommodation for future occupiers due to insufficient privacy. Looking at the proposed elevations, the proposed dwellings would have a design reflecting the Surrey vernacular and have brick to the ground floor and render to the first floor of layout A dwellings, as you can see here, and hanging tiles to the first floor of layout B dwellings, as are now showing. Looking at the floor plans, the properties would meet the space standards and have a good overall space and bedroom size. All the units would be 5-bed, and they may actually be 6 or 7-bed given additional habitable rooms, which would result in a housing mix in conflict with the indicative requirements of the SHMA 2015. That's layout B. Looking at density, this slide shows that the density of the proposed development would be 9.3 dwellings per hectare in the pink area. This would be higher than that to the north, but lower than that to the south, and significantly lower than that to the east, where there are there are a number of units, multiple units within some of the buildings. Moving to the determining issues, these lists show that the issues relating to reasons for refusal in red. I've already mentioned housing mix, trees and standard of accommodation. The proposal does not include the provision of any affordable housing, in conflict with the NPPF 2018, which sets out that affordable housing should be provided on sites in excess of half a hectare, which this site is. The revised NPPF requirement conflicts with policy AHN1 of the local plan part 1, which requires 30% affordable housing on developments with a floor space greater than 1,000 square metres, which this proposal also is. Notwithstanding the conflict between the NPPF and policy AHN1, the current proposal would trigger the NPPF 2018 requirement by virtue of the proposed site area. Whilst the applicant has offered a commuted sum towards off-site affordable housing, policy AHN1 only allows this in rural areas unless there are exceptional circumstances. There are no circumstances why on-site affordable housing cannot be provided in this instance. Additionally, a contribution of £150 towards recycling containers has been sought. However, it is anticipated that, should members resolve to grant permission, a legal agreement could be secured. Whilst officers support the principle of development on this site, officers consider that the proposal before us does not make an efficient use of the land and is in conflict with the newly adopted local plan and the NPPF 2018. Moving to the recommendation. The recommendation, therefore, as set out on pages 31 to 32 of the agenda report, is that permission be refused, with the reasons for refusal relating to the failure to provide affordable housing, loss of trees subject to a TPO and carrying out of building and engineering operations within and contrary to the industry standards recommended root protection areas for mature trees subject to a TPO, an unacceptable juxtaposition between the proposed development and adjacent important trees subject to a TPO, failure to provide a satisfactory mix of housing, unacceptable interlocking and privacy, and failure to secure appropriate planning infrastructure contributions towards recycling containers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Flo. This application is the subject of public speaking, so I turn now to the objector, Mr. Howard Fulbrook. I think the procedure has been explained. Mr. Fulbrook, you have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
I'm Howard Fulbrook of Rosewood, Highfield Crescent, representing those residents who are objecting to this proposal. We are in principle in favour to some development, providing it is sympathetic to the local environment and the adjoining owner's privacy. Overdevelopment. There is a clear overdevelopment of the plot with regard to the size and number of dwellings proposed. The height of 9.5 metres cannot be considered as a dwelling of 2.5 stories. This proposal has houses with considerably larger footprints than the previous planning from a few years ago, but on a reduced size plot. Part of this plot has been sectioned off with the temporary fencing, and the developer has openly stated that he will develop it at a later date. In addition, adjoined to this land is further land property that the developer has acquired, and no doubt in the longer term, the plan is to join all plots up along the back of Highfield Crescent and add more houses. Whilst the council advised that only the plot in question should be considered, surely the bigger picture needs to be addressed here to avoid the planning system being utilised in a way that it was not intended or abused. This development is not in keeping with the current local houses. The houses are unnecessarily large, at 2 to 3 times larger than the majority of houses in the area. Badged as 5-bedroom houses, but are clearly designed to ultimately be 6 or 7-bedroom houses. The number of properties needs to be reduced, or their sizes need to be reduced substantially. Regarding privacy, there's a direct breach of privacy to the existing inhabitants. Whilst balconies have been removed from the previous plan, the large, tall windows remain. To avoid the flat roofs being later turned into balconies, we request a pitch roof is added. The window numbers and sizes give no consideration to the house which the plot abuts and overlooks directly into properties within our road. And the rear gardens are only about 10 metres from house to boundary, which is too close. The houses should be near the front of the plots to allow more distance. Currently, they suit the purchasers only, with no consideration to existing properties. 3 large properties directly back onto Highfield Crescent, whereas other 2 back onto large plots. If the plan was flipped or reversed, this would allow for the 3 to back onto larger plots with no direct facing, and the 2 on the Highfield Crescent side to be repositioned at an angle so they are not directly facing. This simple solution would make a dramatic difference. Importantly, the site plan and application do not take into account that the houses in Highfield Crescent have been extended, and therefore the space between the proposed development and the existing buildings is not accurate. As regards screening, we ask that proper mature screening is guaranteed along the boundary. The proposal states that the row of fir trees which run between development and the gardens at the rear of Highfield Crescent constitute a barrier, and this has been referred as sufficient means of privacy to those residents that are overlooked. This row of trees is old, and they are 50+ feet tall, with most of the growth in the top half, the lower half being straggly and giving minimal screening. They encroach some 3 metres into the gardens and, if thinned, could easily be seen through. Surely any person moving into these properties with only 10 metres of garden will not want to lose 3 metres to an overgrown fir tree. So there is no guarantee that these trees, or indeed any other tree, will stay in place. Regarding traffic, each of these houses are likely to have 3 or more cars plus visitors, so there are safety considerations, especially so close to a school. This and the almost certain possibility of further development is going to lead to far more traffic down Tower Road. Recently, there was a road closure in the area which meant that more traffic via Tower Road. This created chaos, let alone the risk to children who use the several bus stops in the road. Whilst we understand a number of residents from other roads have indicated they are in favour of the development, we ask that you give sufficient attention to our concerns, given that it is the residents of Highfield Crescent who have houses that are directly impacted by the majority of the development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fulbrook. I now call on Jessie Chapman.
Thank you, members of the committee, for allowing me to speak in favour of the proposal this evening. I'm disappointed that, despite detailed pre-application discussions, officers have not fully recognised the merits of the application and are recommending refusal. In making the recommendation, officers identify there will be no adverse impact upon archaeology, ecology, local highway conditions, flooding and drainage. Within the report to committee, officers recognise that the proposed dwellings will be of an appropriate traditional design and of an acceptable scale, size, bulk, mass, height and materials, such that they would not result in material harm to the visual amenity of the area and would accord with the guidance within the Hazelmere design statement. And the dwellings would be partially screened from the street scene on Tower Road by the existing trees, subject to a group tree preservation order, as well as being set back a minimum of 13 metres and as such would not dominate the street scene. From the various earliest outset with pre-application discussions, actually with Brian Titmus, a higher density scheme comprising smaller dwellings was proposed and which could have accommodated on-site affordable housing. However, it was made clear the council would not support a higher density development comprising smaller units on their site. Despite this advice and the development's in keeping nature, the application is recommended for approval for not providing a small unit and failure to provide an on-site affordable housing for this small unit. Notwithstanding this, policy ANH1 does provide flexibility for commuter sums to be made and also to ensure development is in keeping with its surroundings. Indeed, the National Planning Policy Framework places emphasis upon development being in keeping with its surroundings. With regard to the matter of intervisibility between the front elevations of the proposed properties, the new homes are separated by a driveway and off-street parking bays, which means that these properties are separated by some 18 metres at their closest points. It is submitted that this degree of separation is sufficient to prevent any intervisibility occurring and was not brought up as being an issue during pre-application discussions for this development. Please also note that the drawings within the report were superseded some months ago to omit the rear terraces, and the separation distances to neighbouring properties is also in accordance with the Council's design guidance. Although supported by an arboricultural report and assessment, the Council's tree officer has raised concerns with regard to the proximity of the development on trees, even though the same relationship between the buildings and the trees at this site was previously found to be acceptable. The removal of the 2 trees from the TPO belt onto Tower Road is proposed. The layout of the proposal necessitates the removal of the 2 trees to provide an acceptable layout and safe vehicular access and egress. But the applicant is also willing to replace these mature specimens as well as providing suitable landscaping to the scheme, should the Council consider this to be an appropriate condition. Furthermore, any resultant work to the TPO trees on site would require consent. Notwithstanding this, it is not considered that the removal of these 2 trees is so significant as to warrant withholding planning permission. I do understand the views of local residents, and these are important, as well as some objectors. And I stress that the Tower Road, Pine Bank and Moorlands Close Residents Association, who represents some 100 households in the immediate area, support this in-keeping and attractive proposal for new family homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Members, turn to you. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you to the officers for the usual detailed report. Looking at the history of this site, it's clear that there has been general acceptance that the site should be developed. Given the more recent building in the area, it would be a waste of that area not to be able to put more than one house on it. I also salute the approach taken by the applicant, which shows that he is prepared to look at things and discuss them. But I think more of that needs to be done because, in my view, the case officer put it correctly when she described it as an inefficient use of this land. And the high density application of a few years ago was actually for 20 retirement units. And this is for 5 very large houses indeed. And my feeling is that something in the middle would be the best solution. And indeed, if you had, say, 10 smaller houses, some of those could be on-site affordable houses. There is a need for affordable dwellings, and it seems to me a shame that this site is not being used to help address that. So, having looked at the report in detail and listened to both the objector and the applicant, I feel the officer's reasons for refusal are sound. I think the issues with trees could perhaps be overcome if the planning balance was tilted in favour, or rather the planning balance was in favour of development. But this site, with its 5 very large houses, which have a rather uniform design as well, does not seem to me to be one that gives so many advantages that it should be given permission. So if colleagues agree, if the committee agrees, I would like to think that the applicant would think again and come back and have further discussions, and perhaps a more acceptable scheme could be found. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Knowles.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I agree with much that Councillor Mulliner has said, and having heard the submissions and then turning to the conclusions on page 30 of the report, which sets out fairly strong reasons for refusing this application. The proposal for 6 and 7 bedroom units, which I agree with Councillor Mulliner are far too large, and we're looking for some affordable housing. We've been told this is in conflict with the NPPF 2018, and all the other reasons given here. I see no alternative to this being refused.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll come in at this point because I'm the local member who called this application in. A little bit of history. I think the owner of Hatherley, the professor, moved out into a nursing home in about 2005. I'm not quite sure on that. We then had a number of false alarms, 20 new retirement dwellings were talked about. There have been various different owners of the plot, and the decimation of the rather beautiful garden, shrubs and everything else that were there were not the current applicant, I might say. This is an area of large houses in large plots in the main. There are 2-storey, there are 2.5, and there are 3-storey buildings in Tower Road. We all know that. I was quite concerned that, like other areas, that this piece of land, which has now been empty for so long, apart from the one house, Hatherley, which is in a poor state and really is a 20th century building, is not up to 21st century in many ways. But It does require a decent planning application. We've seen further down the road in Hindhead a plot of land that's been vacant for 30 years next to, or just opposite the golf course, next to Magnolia House. And that is something that we have at last got planning permission for. It's taken a long time, but this also is really in need of development. I don't want to see 20 houses on it. I want to see it a little more. I was actually at the pre-application meeting about 15 months ago, so I know what was said. We haven't really mentioned that earlier on in Flo Taylor's presentation, but a number of points were raised at that time on trees, entrances and everything else. Since then, we've had the access discussed. There is a change. The applicants are talking about changing the entrance and removing a couple of trees in the TPO band. That is in itself sad, but they are talking about replacing them with something worthwhile. February this year, we had the local plan passed. That's changed things. The local plan part 2 will also change things, but that's in consultation, we know at the moment. And the MPPF has just come in. And it has changed the importance of the affordable homes and the housing mix on the site. One of the reasons under recommendation provide the housing mix, I don't think is the most important bit. I can see no need for 1- and 2-bedroom properties in that part of Hindhead. So I'm with Councillor Mulliner in this. We need a decent scheme. This is a good scheme, but I don't think the particular style of house that we're looking at is exactly what is necessary in Hindhead. We want large houses. Yes, we do. We want 2, we want 3, 4, 5 bedroom. That is absolutely certain. And it fixes in with what is in Tower Road as we have it now. So I regret that I must follow the officer's recommendation on this, but I do hope the applicant comes back with something that is more acceptable to most of us. Thank you, members. Now turn to Councillor Edward.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is fundamentally wrong. We're squeezing massive houses into a limited area, and I don't understand why they've decided to cut that bit of land off at the end, because I understand it's owned by the same person. And on the previous application, when there were only 4 buildings, the plots were much larger and they were designed differently, if I remember rightly. So I'm not against putting houses on this, but 3 stories on small plots in this area is unacceptable. I understand that the developer wants to make money, but the quality of the area must be maintained. And if there were less houses, the facility and services for those properties would be much improved. And I have to agree with the officers here. In my opinion, it's unacceptable. And I have to agree with them.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure when you say the 2 areas are owned by the same person. I don't think they are. So, but that's a matter for the land registry and not part of this planning application. But I think it's an error. Councillor Coburn.
That's fine, Chairman. This was my route home for many a long year from work, so I used to go past this site. And I'm with everybody on this. I think it's overdevelopment and it's cramped, and I don't like it. Having said that, I really do think, as the chairman has said, you've got to look at the character of the area, and having driven round it, I mean, it is an area of spacious, large houses. I mean, it's just what it is. And I think to put something inappropriate on here just because we've got to tick a few boxes might not be the right solution in the future. I think the applicant has to go back and have a long discussion with the officers and the local members, and I think something acceptable. In fact, you know, there's nothing worse really than empty sites that just degrade over the time. We do want something on this. I preferred the previous one. We've got this one. There's anything in between, and I think this is really a question of going back, looking at the character of the area, looking at the neighbouring properties and the amenity of these surrounding houses, and then coming back with something really suitable. And I hope that can happen soon, because I think it is perfectly possible on this site.
Yes, I think there's been quite a helpful discussion. I hope the applicant takes it in that spirit. From my perspective, I would add, though, that I think the new NPPF must be given great weight. And interestingly, if you look at the diagram showing the densities, if Flo could bring that back up, we're in the interesting position of having an option. You could choose any of the three. But I think in the NPPF 2018 environment, then the 16 dwellings per hectare does rather indicate that that's the sort of density which should be tended towards. I don't think you've got to get there necessarily, but I think it certainly has to be quite a bit higher than 9. And that, certainly speaking purely personally, I would be much happier if I saw that sort of density being offered. Thank you very much, Chairman, for letting me come back.
Thank you. Members, if that's everyone, let's move to the recommendation, please, unless the officers wish to add anything. Louise.
Just to apologise, the drawings in the report have terraces on them. Following the publication of the agenda report back in November, these terraces were in fact removed. The drawings that you've been shown on the presentation are the correct ones, and the elevations and floor plans are the same, but without the terraces. So, yeah, apologies for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The recommendation is that permission be refused for the reasons stated on page 31 and 32 and the informatives on 32. Have those in favour of refusal please show?
That's unanimous.
Thank you very much indeed. So we move on then to next item on the agenda, which is B1 WA 2018-0956, 18 Scotland Close, Haslemere, GU 273AE, erection of extensions and alterations. And introducing this is Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can first start with a verbal update to the agenda report. On page 39 of your report, in the second paragraph in the residential amenity section, it refers to the fact that officers have carefully considered the concerns raised in respect to the impact of the proposal on the amenities of number 18. That should read number 17. Number 18 is in fact the application site. Thank you. So turning to the presentation itself, the site is located on the southern side of Scotland's Close and is occupied by a detached dwelling. Turning to some site photos. This first photo is taken directly in front of the property from Scotland's Close itself. The second photograph shows the subject property with the adjoining property at number 17 Scotland's Close to the left of the photograph just here. And this final photograph is taken from the rear of the property with the neighbouring property at number 17 to the right of the photograph just here. This slide shows the proposed block plan. The proposed two-storey side extension is situated to the east of the dwelling, and it would be set back by 17 metres from the street scene. There are 3 windows on the directly adjoining property at first floor. 2 of these windows directly face the proposed extension, and these serve a toilet and a bathroom, and so are not considered to be habitable rooms. The final window is situated just here, and so would retain its outlook across the front garden of number 18. No concerns are therefore raised in respect of loss of light or outlook to the adjoining property. The extension, the two-storey side extension, is shown in yellow. The extension would have a total height of 7.5 metres, and as you can see, the first floor would overhang the side access, with a side access being retained to the rear of the property. The extension is of an unusual design. However, the character of the street scene is mixed, and given the significant setback from the street and the setback from the front of the dwelling itself, officers consider that the extension would appear appropriate in relation to the surrounding area. There would be two windows at first floor level in the front elevation, one in the main body of the extension here, and one in the overhang. These would both overlook the front garden areas of the property itself and at an oblique angle to the neighbouring property. There would be just one window in the rear elevation of the extension at first floor level. This would serve a bathroom and would be obscure glazed and has been conditioned to remain as such. There would be no windows in the side elevation at first floor level. This is timber cladding. Therefore, there are no concerns with regard to privacy of the adjoining occupier. Turning to the floor plans, at ground floor level, the extension would have a utility room and toilet, and at first floor, there would be a bedroom. Turning now to the determining issues, the matters of principal and technical opinion are the trees and ancient woodland, the effect on the SPA and biodiversity, all of which are considered acceptable in relation to the proposal, and the matters for members' judgment are the design and impact on visual amenity in the AONB and the impact on residential amenity. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Louise. Members. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, perhaps I can ask a couple of questions regarding this application, because when we look back, there was permission in 2015, and it appears that a huge chunk was added to one side of the house on the drawings there, because you can see what was the original, and now we are going in the other direction. So I'd like to know what percentage is this total increase, because it looks to me as if it's getting on towards 100% on the original building. And also, can you confirm absolutely there is no window looking into the bathroom and toilet of the adjoining property?
Thank you. In relation to the first question, I don't know the percentage increase. The test for members this evening is to look at the visual appearance of the dwelling and come to a conclusion as to whether they find it acceptable in relation to the character of the surrounding area. So unfortunately, I can't give you the percentage. In relation to the second question, there is no overlooking into the toilet and bathroom on the neighbouring property. Those windows are situated just opposite this front portion of the extension, and this area would be timber clad. There would be no glazing in the side at all to look into those, and again, there is a condition restricting any further windows being installed on the side or rear at first floor level. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. You want to come back, Councillor?
If I could just, having heard that, yes, and the restriction would be a condition, but how would that be enforced? Are you knowing the standard of enforcement usually? I suspect not at all, but can you explain?
Louise?
Well, should we receive a complaint that they have put a window in the elevations that are restricted by the condition, then our enforcement team would investigate and they would look to see whether there was any harm, and then on that basis decide whether to proceed with enforcement action or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at page 39, second paragraph, policy TD1 says the new development is designed to create safe and attractive environments. Not attractive, I'm sorry. I know beauty's in the eye of the beholder here, but, looking at it, it's pretty awful, to put it mildly. I don't understand why we continue to have extensions set back from the original line, because it just makes it look ugly and an add-on. I mean, I know previously we said that we need to identify any additions, but that's in the past now with modern technology. With regard to this extension, it'd be right up against the boundary, I take it, of next door. Am I right in thinking that?
Louise?
Yes, that's correct. So the first floor element with the overhang is situated just in front of the boundary, which is denoted by the boundary fence here, which is just there. So it is at first floor level, it is right up to the boundary.
And so there's still access to the rear of the property down that side, is there?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
I think this is overdevelopment. I think the design is poor, in my opinion. I understand they want to extend for the reasons they've given. I'm not against extension per se, but I think more thought needs to go into it, because looking at those elevations there, it's pretty ordinary, I would say, and that's being kind, okay? So that's all I can say. I'm not happy with this application, I'm afraid. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Munn.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I start with a question too? Just following on from Councillor Knowles' request to know what the percentage increase was, could you educate us as to the rules regarding adding to properties? I thought there was a 40% limit. Could you go into detail, please?
Please.
If you're within the green belt, then you cannot add any extensions that are disproportionate to the original dwelling. And we have a local plan policy that basically says that disproportionate is usually anything above 40%. But that policy only applies in the green belt, and we are in the developed area here. So the test is a visual one. Does the extension fit in with the character of the surrounding area? And in this instance, there's an eclectic mix of dwellings within the road, and they are all different. And it is officers' view that whilst unusual and whilst not to everybody's taste, the extension itself wouldn't be so harmful as to be out of character with the surrounding area. Thank you.
Right. What is the, and a question that hasn't been asked, but the first floor of number 17 adjoining number 18, are there any windows affected by the proximity of the second floor of the extension?
So there are 3 windows. If I just take you back to the photographs, there are 3 windows in the side of the adjoining property. You can see one there, there's one there, and then there's one between that window and the chimney that's not very clear from the photograph. It's a small toilet window. So this one is a bathroom and a toilet. They would directly face the extension. However, they are a bathroom and a toilet and are not obscure glazed. So whilst if you look out of those, you will see the extension. It's not considered to be harmful. This window at the front is set forward of the extension and would continue to have an outlook over the front garden area of the application site. So in officers' view, whilst there are windows, they are not materially affected by the proposal.
Thank you. The reason for my question is I had perhaps wrongly heard you talk about the ground floor. In that, what are the ground floor windows on that side of number 17?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know what the ground floor windows are, but they are already blocked by the existing boundary treatment along the boundary. So there's not considered to be any more harm to any windows at the ground floor from the existing boundary treatment and then the property itself, which exists on the site. Thank you.
Okay, I think my only comment is that the sort of outpouching seems to sort of almost create a quasi-terrace effect when, from my memory of Scotland Close, although the buildings are close together, they're all distinctly separated. So while perhaps not sharing Councillor Edwards' concern with the aesthetics of it to the same extent, I do think that it's slightly unnecessary and that I must admit, on balance, I'm not a fan of it, I must admit. Thank you.
Councillor Adams.
I don't quite see how you can argue that it doesn't affect the density or outlook of the AONB. I mean, it basically closes the gap between the two houses. And the whole point about the AONB is to have a low density and gaps between the houses and not generally spoil the view and scenery. So I'm against this. I don't see that it is appropriate in the AONB.
Louise, could you just clarify whether close is in the AONB?
Yes, it is in the AONB. However, as you can see from the location plan, the actual character of the area is of residential properties in this particular road. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small question. Louise, you just said it's in the AONB. Does that mean Scotland's Close is entirely in the area of outstanding natural beauty, or is it to the south of them?
It is in it, yeah, it's in the AONB. It is an unusual situation. There's not many residential roads like this that are within the AONB, but this is in fact in the AONB.
Did we redraw the boundary recently, or has it been like that for some time?
We don't draw the AONB boundary. Natural England draw the AONB boundary, and there is a future review planned of the AONB boundary, but as it stands at the moment, this particular site and the close itself is within the AONB. Thank you.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. Flo, Louise, could I just, it's Louise, isn't it? Could I just go back to the street scene, the sort of, just so that we get the full effect of where we're looking at here? And is that's all we have of the street scene? Is it the sort of mixture of houses and sizes?
Yes, sorry, I'm afraid that's all.
No, that's fine. I just really wanted to clarify what we're looking at because, you know, as you say, it is, you know, quite packed, if you like, already, isn't it, in terms of development. And we're looking at a development which is unusual. I'm just amazed it holds itself up, but, you know, I rely on engineers to get this right. You know, and really it's a question of what is reasonable to object on. And, you know, I'm afraid Councillor Edwards' sensibilities doesn't usually come in the list of reasons for refusal. It's a very difficult one, and I can understand everybody's issues, but it is a very built-up street scene, and, you know, I'm finding it very difficult to know whether this is on balance acceptable or not.
Councillor Knowles.
Thank you very much for letting me come back. And as the ward member, I may be able to assist the Vice Chairman. It's not as built up as it's being made to look. The gaps are quite big between the houses. It's not semi-terraced, which this will become. And the other point I'd like to support what Councillor Mulliner said, that the overhanging piece, whatever we're going to call it, how that can't go to be block light out from the downstairs windows is beyond me, because the light comes down and that will be sticking out over, and there will be a huge loss of light because now there's a gap. There won't be. And I think to pretend that there won't be a loss is quite ridiculous. Thank you.
Councillor Round, you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I just thought I might as well join the club and offer my own opinion on the architecture. It's not a particularly, to my view, well, I suppose I shouldn't say it was an attractive house or not, but I don't think extension is that bad. I actually believe it balances the house by being set back from the main building. It is in good company with the extension that was previously done on the right-hand side. Sorry, I'm looking at the top left picture. And I think it's okay, although it does give rather a small room upstairs. I can see why they want the applicant wants the overhanging bit. When you walk up Scotland Lane, which I do know, and you look between the houses, you don't get a terribly rural impression, and because you're looking up at the houses, you can't really see much through the gaps between them. Sorry, I meant to say Scotland Close. And therefore, I don't think the almost filling of this gap by this extension is that deleterious or that odd. I'm still in two minds, but veering towards saying, well, why not build it? Thank you.
Councillor Edward, do you want to come back?
Just a quick one. With regard to loss of amenity for number 17, if they came forward with a proposal to extend towards number 18, they wouldn't be allowed because of the overhanging window or whatever it is, bay window. This bay window, it's madness. I just can't understand it. I know they want to get extra light in there, because maybe a little bit claustrophobic, but it's loss of amenity for number 17. It's overlooking. It is. If I lived in number 17, I'd be very angry. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just looking on the vertical bits and pieces of both Scotland Close and Scotland Lane, and there are some very small gaps between houses. There's some big ones too, but there's a very mixed area, and densities are something else. I do look at this and say, I mean, immediately opposite, there's some different houses, quite different. Anyway, Councillor Martin, you want to come?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. I've just realised, of course, that this is on the south side, isn't it? And Councillor Knowles makes a very good point, that in summer especially, light comes principally from on top. So having a view of the front garden is not a great deal of help, as that you might get a bit of light then in the late evening. But if I'm correct, then there's no doubt that the natural light coming into the front room will be reduced. Whether enough to make a huge difference, I don't know. But I mean, I can understand why putting this extension there will have some effect. And it's not a trivial point. And I noticed that in the objections that that's what the occupier has put forward. So I entirely agree there's a mix of spaces. But this is not something which really I feel terribly warm towards. Thank you.
Councillor Adams, do you want to come back?
Well, only really just to mention that because part of the Scotland Close is not, there are not gaps between some of the houses now, doesn't mean we should exacerbate the problem of the AONB by closing another one.
Thank you very much. Officers, do you want to make any further comment before we move to the recommendation?
The only further comment I would like to make is to clarify that this is timber cladding and there is no windows directly facing the application site. The only clear windows in the proposal are the ones on the front elevation. There's one at the rear which is obscure glazed, and then this element here and this element here is timber clad. So I do not think that members would be able to substantiate a reason for refusal on overlooking. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Round, final time.
Well, maybe I'm being a bit thick, but I think that's quite material. I thought there were windows. You mean the blank spaces we're looking at in the middle of the yellow elevation there, that is not a window?
That's correct. That's timber cladding, so that isn't a window, and there is conditions attached restricting any additional windows in either this elevation and the rear one, which there is a window there, but that is again obscure glaze, which is again secured by condition. Thank you.
But the front of it, there's no window, the front of the sticky out bit.
Sorry, so at the front, so there's a window here and that is a window. So at the front there would be views, but those would be over the front garden and areas and the street
Sorry,
itself.
what your cursor is pointing at is a window, but now, that bit,
yeah,
is that a window?
That's a window, yes. Oh, sorry,
okay.
as I look away.
But it's not a window in the back of the sticky out bit.
That's correct. So in the front there's an ordinary window, as you would ordinarily see, and then this large glazed window here. On the side, it is timber cladding, and at the rear, it is timber cladding on the projecting element, and then an obscure glazed window in the rear of the main body of the extension.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, members, let's move to the recommendation on page 40 and 41. Recommendation is permission be granted subject to the conditions and the informative. Those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Therefore, that is lost. Can I have an alternative recommendation, please? Councillor Munn.
That permission be refused.
Thank you. And a seconder? Thank Councillor Knowles. Now, reasons, please. Microphone, please.
I beg your pardon. Yeah. Loss of light, loss of residential amenity, and loss of visual amenity.
And further obstruction of the views of the AONB.
Louise?
Thank you. Following on from those comments and some of the ones I've picked up from your earlier discussion, I would recommend two reasons for refusal. The first one, the proposal would result in a poor design and would fail to retain adequate separation to boundaries, which would be out of character with the surrounding area and harmful to the character of the AONB. And this would be contrary to policies D1 and D4 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2002, policy TD1 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2018, and paragraphs 127, 130, 170 and 172 of the MPPF 2018. And the second reason for refusal, the proposal would result in a loss of light to the adjoining occupiers at 17 Scotland Close, detrimental to their residential amenities. This would be contrary to D1 and D4 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2002 and policy TD1 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2018. And if you can allow me to insert the relevant paragraph of the MPPF, as I'm still not entirely up to date with all the paragraphs, so I'll confine that and add that into the reason for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Is that to your satisfaction?
Yes,
Councillor
indeed.
Munner?
Thank you.
Right. Those in favour of refusal on the grounds that have just been read out, please show.
5.
Those against? Abstentions?
1, 2.
Thank you. Permission is refused. And that completes the agenda for tonight. No need